Thank you very much. Muchísimas gracias a todos. En primer lugar, first of all, I want to thank Salomon for his persistence in bringing me here back again to San Bernardino County. It's a great honor to be here with you again after 1 year and bring something that is now tangible to all of us. I truly believe that it has been rocky times. I understand many of you as businessmen have hold or your projects have been hold still until we have a product that shows certainty to you and the market. So let me make a recount of what happened in 1 year, of course, besides not sleeping. Right? Why NAFTA is so important for Mexico, if I make this happen. What? Okay, seems that technology is making me a joke here. Let me see if we can do this. The high-tech guys. Why NAFTA is so important for us? Many of you that are here in California understand California is the 7th largest economy in the world, right? And Mexico is the first trading partner for that. Besides California, of course, Texas, Arizona, and we can go throughout all the states. But this is a graph that shows the value of trade with the U.S. First trading partner for the U.S. is China by $636 billion. Canada with 583, Mexico 557, and you can go through. The big difference I want to highlight here for you is why there's a big difference between China vis-a-vis Canada and Mexico. The big difference, and Marcelo had it right when he started making his comments, is fair trade. This is not the word or fair that President Trump has in mind. Please, bear with me on that. Fair trade means playing by the rules. Fair trade doesn't mean I want to relocate the plants, I want to recreate the jobs in the US. That's not fair trade. Fair trade is let the markets behave as markets and let the market inertia to work its game. Wherever competition and competitiveness is allowed, the beneficiary of it is going to be the consumer. And that's what you can call fair trade. And we agree with you, Marcelo, on that. So that's the big difference. Canada and Mexico, we do have a free trade agreement with the U.S. We are two of the best trading partners of the U.S. China is also a big trading partner, but with a huge trade deficit and without playing with the with rules, clear trade, international trade rules. And then we can go with other partners. That is the importance of the relationship between Mexico, Canada, and the U.S. Now, why Mexico is so important for the U.S. and why the U.S. is so important for Mexico? First of all, 80% of trade between for Mexico happens with the U.S. It's undeniable that if our best trading partners, if one of your clients has 80% of your portfolio, let me use this word, we are screwed. If I were to have an audit, and the accountant comes and I show the books, and he looks at one supplier upholding 80% of my portfolio, I'm gonna fail the test, right? And that's what happened. What happened is Mexico, the U.S., and Canada sat on a 20-year-old agreement, and we get it for granted that everything was fine. The NAFTA didn't evolve in time. The NAFTA got obsolete, and governments and industries didn't do the job of improving the NAFTA. That is the failure that we can attest for. So Mexico has done a diversification effort, and we are trying to reach out to more trading partners, including North, South, East, and West. So we have By now, we can account for 46 trading partners. 6 more to come when we ratify CPTPP. I got it right. But this graph is going to show you why Mexico is so important for the US. If you look at the graph, it shows you that 39, almost 40% of every single dollar that Mexico exports to the world accounts for US content. So just imagine that for every dollar that we send, 40 cents are US content. So come back to the US. Canada, that's the level of integration. That shows you how much we are integrated. We don't compete, but we complement each other. Canada has only 24. Well, only sounds minimalistic, but it's not. So it's pretty good. And we can go through, but let me point out to China, 4.2. That means that China exports to the US 99% or 98% more than what they receive. The integration is minimal between China and the US. And of course, Brazil goes to 2.8%. Now, what are the principles we directed these negotiations for? The complexity of the negotiation itself was based on 3 different point of views that we needed to harmonize, that we needed to agree on how to negotiate this new deal. The first one is, remember President Trump, when he was campaigning, he said, NAFTA is a bad deal. That was her first statement, his first statement. His second statement was, the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, is a bad deal, and I'm not going to sign on. So he withdrew. The second promise of campaigning has been accomplished. The first one, which is renegotiating NAFTA, has been also accomplished. He argues that Mexico stole, through the NAFTA, US jobs. It's a big lie. Yeah, I'm surprised too, definitely. I'm definitely surprised. But that's his statement. What he sees is that, of course, Mexico has lower income jobs, and we are more manufacturing than the U.S. The cost of the cost of life in the U.S. is more expensive than in Mexico. Therefore, there's an unbalanced salary income, and therefore they argue that we are taking the jobs. The reality is, before I continue with the rest, the reality is the same problem that the U.S. faces is the same problem that Mexico, Canada, Japan, Korea, China suffers. It's automation. It's not that Mexico took those jobs from the U.S. It's that automation is a natural displacer of jobs. The difference is that the U.S., through its programs, reinserts the displaced workers into the work. Mexico doesn't do that. We're working on it, but we haven't accomplished that yet. Third point, his obsession to the trade deficit. We all heard that. He said that Mexico owes the U.S. $70 billion annually on trade deficit, which means basically that we sell more to the U.S. than what we import from the U.S. I think there's a big confusion in the U.S. about trade deficit or trade balance and trade deficit. Trade balance is precisely $70 billion that Mexico sends as a surplus to the U.S. Trade deficit means how you're accounting, your government accounting is. And the confusion is because the savings in the U.S. are really low because of the expenditures and the reliance on the bonus, or the treasury bonus that China has. That is trade deficit, but not trade balance. Trade balance is the $70 billion. But we have to face that in the negotiation. Why for us renegotiating NAFTA was important? First of all, because the U.S., when we were negotiating TPP, the Obama administration, Canada and Mexico saw the opportunity to supersede the NAFTA through the TPP. It was a natural way to go without opening the Pandora box of the NAFTA renegotiation. Short of the TPP because of President Trump declining his membership in TPP, we agreed to modernize the NAFTA, this 20-year-old obsolete agreement. But we put some conditions, and I will go to it. Now, why Canada put a different perspective into the agreement? Because Prime Minister Trudeau have a progressive agenda that includes gender equality, indigenous communities, protection and recognition of indigenous communities, labor, environment, and people's mobility. Those are the 5 premises under which Canada negotiated this free trade agreement. These are the conditions we put forward to the US in order to negotiate. We have to get the best deal possible for all 3. The strategy was to move from the easiest chapters. At the beginning, they said, oh yeah, you have 2 rounds of negotiations, you have closed 3 chapters. Yeah, fine. But you close chapters that are not controversial. Well, the strategy precisely was to start creating this snowball and creating the landscape, the milestones for the US to be more difficult for them to leave the table. If we wanted to sort out the most controversial issues, what will happen is we will run out of coins. If you are negotiating a deal and you put out your best offer possible at the beginning, you're done, right? So we needed to start with the easy part of it, move forward, start creating this momentum, this inertia for once, and also continue to get into the most nitty-gritty issues, the most complex issues towards the end of the negotiation. One, for example, is auto sector. For those that are in the auto and auto parts sector, they know they were in the burning list, right? We cannot put those issues at the forefront of the negotiation because we will be done. That will kill the negotiation itself. So the strategy for Mexico was to go from the easy to the complex. Now, these are the most controversial issues that we found to be in the negotiation process. The fixation of the trade deficit, we have discussed that. The trade dispute settlement, this is very interesting because for those that are familiar with the investment provisions of the NAFTA 1994, let me make a little bit of history here. Locate yourselves in the 1980s. 1985, I was a very young guy, but I look older than I am. But let's imagine you are in the 1980s, Mexico City. It was a one-party government. PRI was dominating not only the government, but also the states, Congress, and judiciary. So the checks and balances was completely inclined to one way, right? You can do whatever legal amendment, constitutional amendment you wanted, and you can get it done because of your predominance in Congress. U.S. concern when we were negotiating NAFTA was, you are asking me that my investors come to your country, but they have no protections. If the government needs to take action to one of my investors, they have no legal recourse because your court is one-sided, right? You have the dominance. You can instruct your court to do whatever you want. So we created a mechanism which is called investor-state dispute settlement mechanism, where an investor for another country can sue the Mexican government, the Mexican state, against a taking, an expropriation, a measure that equals to expropriation. And this is going to be taken out of the Mexican courts to an international panel. And that's going to give the investor the protection that he's going to get a fair result. Either he's right or wrong, the panel, the arbitrators are going to resolve it, not the Mexican courts. So it makes sense, right? That gives you the protection in the case of an action of a government that dominates the country. Curiously enough, in this negotiation, in the NAFTA 2.0 negotiation, the U.S. asked to remove this protection. The U.S. is the one that didn't want to have, or didn't want to provide U.S. investors with the protection in the Mexican territory. Sounds weird, right? Sounds kind of strange. No, it has full logic. What do you want to create? Uncertainty. Number two, you want to disincentivize investment going outside your country. That's President Trump's views. Keep investments in the U.S. How? Remove the protections that you have given up, that you have given to your investors outside the U.S. That's the view. And the other dispute settlement mechanism that is in the mix is the state to state. This is where states can sue the other state in terms of interpretation of the NAFTA, any breach of the NAFTA obligations, right? It's a state to state dispute. They wanted a clause that says, if the result of the arbitration is not favorable to me, or I don't like it, it's not binding. Okay, it's like if I don't like the sushi, I just return it, right? That doesn't work. You have to have a dispute settlement mechanism that has teeth, that is binding. Otherwise, it's useless, and you have no protection. Now let me move a little bit faster on the other issues. Chapter 19, of course, is it has been a lot of resonance, particularly because it's Canada's interest to preserve the dispute settlement mechanism under Chapter 19, which is dumping and subsidies. And we supported that. But it was Canada's, one of Canada's most appealing issues. Rules of origin, I was talking in the breakfast with some friends, and I asked, out of the, please, those that are in the breakfast do not answer this question. We have 12,000 rules of origin. For the sake of the audience, a rule of origin is how you define the manufacturing of one good, one product. Let's say the microphone. Whether you transform it within the NAFTA region, so it enjoys duty-free or not duty-free. If the microphone is just imported to Mexico and reshipped to the US, it's Chinese. It does have no transformation as to account for benefit of duty-free treatment, right? That is a rule of origin. If I assemble it, and that's why the rule of origin is defined by product. If I assemble it and that gives it the transformation from pieces to a microphone, then enjoys duty-free. If it's yes, you can export it free. If it's not, you will pay the duty that applies to a Chinese good into the US. Out of the 12,000 rules of origin that we have, how many do you think we have to go through in this negotiation? 50%. 50%. Up or down? Who goes? Up? Wrong. Down. Numbers. 20? You were in the breakfast? That's cheating. I don't want to put the spot on you, but you didn't hear it well. It was 5. Only 5 rules of origin have been modified from the NAFTA 1.0. Autos, of course, was the main concern of the US. Auto parts, fiberglass, glass, steel and aluminum, and chemicals. That's it. We were able to manage that only those 5 products or offer changes. The rest of the goods annex of the NAFTA remain in place, which means duty-free yet still remains between Mexico and the US. Government procurement, of course there's a typo there, sorry for that, I will kill someone. The US wanted to reduce the government procurement, which means how much government procurement deals with how the government buys goods and services or infrastructure, which is basically through tenders, right? Public bids, invitation to 3 or more people, or direct assignation of resources. And the US proposal was, let's rebalance this because it's unfair that I give you access to $147 billion market every year of US government expenditures. That's what the US government spends, if you didn't know that. On goods, services, and construction. Whereas Mexico only offers me 47. So you spend less than me. Therefore, I'm not going to give you access to all this. It's like, let's trade cheesecakes. But mine is a full size and yours is just 1/3 of it. So I'm going to give you 1/3, right? Canada is even less than that. Canada, it's only $17 billion expenditures in the federal government. Mexico said, you know what? I don't like your proposal, but I'm going to reverse it a little bit. You are telling me you are giving me access to $147 billion market, but yet I don't know how much I have already sell you every year. So my counter proposal, I have a very good, clever negotiator here, said, tell me how much you have bought from Mexicans, and that's how much I'm going to give you of access into the Mexican market. And of course, for those that don't have a clue on the numbers, Mexico sells 0 or near to 0 on government procurement to the US. Mexican suppliers, what they do is they import, we sub-supply, we are subcontractors. So we sell the cement. Cement is coming from Mexico, but we don't do the contracting. We supply the goods, but we don't sell it to the government. So it's a bypass. But it's not a bypass, but it's a secondary market that we do not account for. So at the end, we managed to convince the US to withdraw that proposal. And that was one of the so-called poison pills. Trucking is, as you many of you, because we are in California, you know that we have free access on cross-border trucking services. That means that a Mexican truck can cross the border and provide services, delivery services, no cabotage though, but can deliver into a US destination. The US didn't comply with that rule in 1985. We sued the US, we brought it to a state-to-state dispute settlement mechanism. We won the case, and we were able to enforce it through retaliation. We imposed $1.2 billion trade restrictions to the US, and that $1.2 billion accounted for the US Congress to change the law. That is how valuable is having a trade dispute settlement mechanism. The US wanted to change that in order to get the Teamsters votes, and we disagree. So there's some language there, but it has no impact whatsoever in the commitments agreed upon. This agricultural restriction, I'm sorry I'm taking a little longer on this, but this is the core of the negotiation. The agricultural restriction is, let's pick up on grapes from California, which is one of the biggest markets, or cranberries. At the peak of the season of the grapes, they could restrict Mexico's imports to avoid injury to the domestic industry. That is, and has been held by the WTO, the World Trade Organization, as in violation. And yet, the US wanted us to agree in a contract, in a document, that we will be breaching the WTO. That's unacceptable, and that's a trade restriction that we will not accept, never ever. We were able to manage to withdraw, to convince the US to withdraw that. And now the two last issues. Sunset clause. Those who are married. I love this example, and it was a Minister Freeland's example. Did you get married thinking that in 5 years you will be free again? Thank you. Yeah. Well, I bet some of you thought you could do it. I do not deny that. Some may have reflected, oh yeah, that would be cool. And then you can switch or regain or remarry the same person, probably. That doesn't happen. We do not negotiate these agreements which have a high impact in the economy of both sides. Remember, just talking about NAFTA changed the dollar-peso exchange rate. NAFTA played a huge role in the stability of the peso-dollar. My kids were surprised. They said, Daddy, really? Did you do that? I said, no, I don't play with the peso-dollar, but I play with the NAFTA. So the truth is, NAFTA is a very high-impact agreement that cannot last for 5 years. The US proposal was to kill the NAFTA every 5 years. And it was up to the three parties to confirm their willingness to continue to renew, in the marriage example, to renew their vows every 5 years. What happened if one of the three was not able to pass it through Congress every 5 years, in one of the sunset reviews? You are left alone. We could not accept, for two reasons. We could not accept the principle itself, but yet, I can't ask, and that's going to take me to the final issue of autos. I couldn't accept to ask my industry, the Mexican auto industry, to make such a heavy lifting, because we knew the big deal was going to be in autos, and they will have to do a lift to close a deal with the US. And yet say, oh, but beware, in 5 years, this may be gone. So all your investments may be washed away. We couldn't accept that. Now, the three pillars of how we negotiated this. We have the first column that shows the modernization chapters. Those where we believe gives the North American region the best competitiveness possible. Starting from digital trade. Digital trade was not in the 1994, but now I can see all of us having 1, 2, or even 3 cell phones, right? Many of you probably, while we are talking here, are making a transfer paying your utilities, or probably you are sending a message. Digital trade is a fundamental part for the competitiveness of the region. Telecommunications goes hand in hand, but Mexico, remember, President Peña Nieto, in his tenure since he took office, made a commitment to make an overhaul of the Mexican legal system. He committed with Congress, and this is very important to highlight. President Peña Nieto committed, he has the view of transforming Mexico and really make an overhaul of the legal system. So if you have 7 or 10 initiatives that you want to pass through Congress in 6 years, but Congress may hold one as a hostage, then you don't do the job, because you will fall short. So his commitment with Congress was, let's agree that we will discuss all the reforms, one by one, but all of them. Regardless of the result, because Congress was not bound by any result. It was a debate and approval of the law, whatever it was. But it was committed to discuss fully all the laws. We changed the labor, the competition, constitutional reform, energy, telecom, education, fiscal, the fiscal regime, but all in conjunction gave Mexico the competitiveness to move forward. Anti-corruption, it's a fundamental part of it as well, because that assures that we are going to have consequences if we do not abide by the provisions of to combat this cancer. Obviously, competitiveness. First time in the history that we have a chapter on competitiveness, and goes tied up to the SMEs. SMEs is the small and medium enterprises. What you call here the SBA, the SBA authority. We have it in Mexico, but we needed them to tie it up and really put the SMEs, which are the support of the U.S. economy and also from the Mexican economy, into the supply chain. We needed to commit, we needed the U.S., Canada, and Mexico to commit that the SMEs will play a huge role in the economic growth of the region. Now, what we call the red lines for us, and what we call, which we have, oh, time expired. And we have the famous poison pills. Is the red line?
It's red. So
oh my God, Batman is coming.
Any other color will be no problem. It's red.
Either the president is calling me or it's Batman call. And we have the elimination of the U.S. poison pills, which many of them have been discussed. This is the sunset clause. This is extremely confusing, but it was the way we found to overcome U.S. proposal of killing the NAFTA every 5 years. So we have a review. We have agreed. Actually, we call it the it still says sunset, but we call it the sunrise. It's a 6-year review, and in 6 years, if you didn't agree, if you don't like it, in the 6th, you start a 10-year review to get into the 16th anniversary. So the agreement is renewed every 16 years. That's it's a little bit complex, but what it tells you is if we don't agree, if in the 6th anniversary, one of the out of the 3 do not agree with the performance of the agreement, instead of killing it, we start a 1 year, every year review until we either reach an agreement and then renew for another 16, or in the year 16, you kill it. But it's not an easy way out. It's not a commitment to withdraw unless we renew. Now, this is the complex part of it. This is going to be a little bit, bear with me, and if there's any question in particular, please feel free to ask. U.S. obsession on trade deficit. How do you address the most out of the trade deficit? The auto sector. Undeniably, auto and the auto parts sector accounts for more than 60% of trade, 50% of trade. So addressing the 80-20 rule, if you resolve the 80% of your problem, you can deal with the 20%. This is what we did. We increase what we call the MFN tariff. Autos will continue to be duty free. That's for sure. We increase. Let's see. There should be another. No. Okay, I'm missing one graph, but the auto rule itself is a 62.5% regional content. So that means that if you divide the car, 62.5 has to be North American made, and 37.5 was to be imported. You were allowed to import up to 37%. The U.S. proposal at the beginning, at the outset of the conversation, was now, instead of 62.5, which is, by the way, the highest rule of origin percentage worldwide, we are the most demanding ones. Korea, for example, has 30 instead of 62. Panama has 30, 35, Colombia has 35, with the U.S. The U.S. says, I want 85. That means you can only import components up to 15% of the car. Impossible. That is impossible. I was in the breakfast with one of car dealers, and he said, his immediate response was, no way. In US terms, not in Mexican terms. He said, no, that can't happen. Yeah, those Mexicans understood that one. Brazilians got it too. He said, no way, that cannot happen. It's impossible to reach 85%. But yet, the other component was surprising. He said, 50% out of the 85 has to be US made. So they were asking us to buy for Mexican manufacturing plants 50% of the components out of the US. It's impossible even. Just to give you an example, electronic components are not made neither in Mexico, Canada, or the US. They are coming from China, Korea, Japan. If I can't get it from the US, where am I going to get it to give to enjoy zero duty? So that was the challenge. We reversed that. We managed to raise 75% out of the raise it to, instead of 62 to 75. We included we managed, actually was Canada's proposal, to include a labor component into the rule of origin. So you have the product content, but now we have a labor content, which is 40% out of the 100% of the car. 40% must be done with $16 an hour wage. Well, it sounds complicated. I can assure you that accountants are going to be billionaires with this. But to give you an example, just imagine there's some wire rod that goes into the tires, right? Which gives the strength of the gum. We will be able to manage. We will be able to account that steel done in California Steel, for example, at $16 an hour wage, put it into the formula and account for it into the compliance of the 40%. Marketing, transportation, obviously manufacturing, all that goes into this accounting process. So it will be complex. That will be one of the biggest hurdles the industry, not the US industry, the industry of the North American region will have to bear in exchange of enjoying free trade. Now, one of the biggest concerns that we had is the famous 232 investigation. The 232 investigation is a section of the US law that provides the US possibility to impose tariffs. That's the phrase that President Trump loves, tariffs, to other countries to protect the interest of national security. He implemented one measure on steel and aluminum, and he's working on another one for autos, which means he can raise the tariffs up to 25% on imports of cars. So if you are bringing a car, even if you have a duty-free treatment, the US can impose 25% duty on the imports of every car. That's a killing, not only for Mexico, but for Japan, Korea, Europe, and in the case of auto parts, China. So we needed to find an assurance and a kind of a security from the US. And that's what we call the 2.6 million vehicles. Even if the vehicle from Mexico complies or not with the NAFTA rule of origin, we will not be subject to 25% duties. There's a waiver, this side letter that we are going to be signing with the US, and Canada will be signing another one, waives the imposition of duties to cars from Mexico and Canada. And of course, you can speculate about the 2.6 million vehicles or the 1.8 It's $1.8 billion. It's not 108 billion. Just imagine that. No. This is I explained a little bit about it. Investor state. Remember how you can bring a lawsuit against the government. Trade remedies. This precisely talks about the anti-dumping and subsidies, arbitration, and the state-to-state. I will not focus anymore on this, as we have discussed. Labor, there was a challenge, and there's a lot of criticism from the press saying that we are raising salaries in Mexico through the new USMCA. That is not true. Salaries, the only part where we are discussing salaries is in the NAFTA, in the out of rule of origin, and it's only to account for $16 per hour in 40% of the time. We have not committed on increasing the wages in Mexico. This is not an agreement where you deal with that. What we committed is to effective protection and enforcement of your laws on labor. What it means, you know that Mexico is a huge exporter of tomatoes, right? If we have tomatoes there, I can bet to you 8 out of 10 of those are from Mexico. True, it's a true number. 8 out of 10 tomatoes that you consume in the US are coming from Mexico. So, if my tomato producers are doing so well in the US market, and even if they were not, but assuming they are doing very well, I'm not going to allow them to have child labor, forced child labor, do not respect the Mexican laws on labor to be competitive. In other words, you cannot allow a company to undermine Mexican laws on labor laws to export or to be more competitive. You have to respect your laws. And if not, we will be sanctioned, we will be subject to imposition of trade sanctions. This is similar of what happened in 1994. Remember that the NAFTA was negotiated by President Bush, but because we ran out of time, the new administration, the incumbent, President Clinton, sorry, I sliced that. President Clinton said, I am a Democrat, and I have a Democratic Congress. You want me to pass this agreement, which has no support within the democratic environment, you need to give me something on labor and environment. And we agreed. Mexico and Canada agreed to negotiate two side agreements, labor and environmental side agreements, but they did not have the casual link to trade. That was the biggest, you can call it failure of the negotiation in the US side, because there was no casual link into trade. Today, Mexico has evolved. Canada, of course, has evolved as well. And we have been able to accept, we can agree to subject any labor infraction or any labor violation into the trade arena. We are willing to commit that if we fail to enforce our labor or environmental laws, we can go to trade. So that's a big difference that you can see. And this happens in the TPP. So it's not new for Mexico. We have been dealing with this for quite a bit. This is the 232. Just to give you an example of what Mexico is doing, because we face U.S. U.S. duties on steel, 25%, and 10% duties on aluminum. So we decided to, if we do a reciprocal retaliation to the U.S., what will be the consequence? We will be hitting ourselves in the foot. Because if I restrict steel, that I use it in the auto sector in Mexico, I will only be increasing the price of my manufacturing plants. So we decided to impose retaliatory sanctions to the US, of course, on steel, but of course also on agricultural and industrial goods. On agricultural, just imagine that Mexico is one of the largest markets for pork from the US. The Corn Belt, just imagine the map of the US where the pork producers are found. Those are suffering because they cannot export a single ounce of pork into Mexico. The market has been shut down for them. Cranberries cannot go to Mexico. Apples, I mean, they can go. Let me rephrase that. They can go, but they will have to pay a duty to get into it. So they will have to pay more to sell their products and compete with the Mexican market or other markets that play in the Mexican territory. That strategy allows for them to lobby and advocate with U.S. Congress, with U.S. governors, to remove, for convincing President Trump to remove these tariffs. Now, let me conclude on what's next. One of our commitments is to reach, to finalize the legal scrub that we're doing under the NAFTA. Of course, correcting all these, crossing the T's and dotting the I's, correcting the mistakes that our negotiators did. We cannot change the substance, that's for sure. We cannot touch upon the substance. But we are trying to conclude the review so the presidents can sign it at the end of November. That's soon. From there, it will be up to the new administration, the transition team in Mexico, to take over and send it to the Senate for ratification. For President Trump to send it to the Congress for vote. That will happen. There was a press article. Everyone was so scandalized because Mitch McConnell, Senator McConnell, said this agreement is not going to be considered by this session of Congress. And everyone was calling us and they wanted to brief and what's happening, what is the crisis? I said, there's no crisis. I don't know why everyone was so scandalized because of the statement of Mitch McConnell. What he said is, because of the timelines that the U.S. law provides for this agreement to be ratified, this cannot be done in this session. It will go to the next in 2019. That's it. So no panic. The agreement goes fine so far. And it's up to the Parliament in Canada, the U.S. Congress, and Mexican Senate. We don't have to go to the House to ratify it in 2019, and hopefully will enter into force 2020. So with that, I stop, but I will be happy to...
I'm going to ask you a couple of questions.
Okay, it's over. Enjoy dinner. And